A black grocery clerk dashes into danger to save a toddler from a reversing truck, while the child's wealthy father watches frozen. No cameras, no applause, just instinct. What happens next flips their worlds. This is one of those heartwarming stories you won't forget. Watch till the end and tell us where you're watching from. It was the kind of morning most people ignored. A slow drizzle had passed just after dawn, leaving the sky overcast and the pavement dark with moisture. The parking lot at Brookline Mart reflected the dull gray light like a mirror. It was quiet, not empty, but not busy either, just the low hum of car engines, the occasional hiss of tires over puddles, and the metallic rattle of shopping carts being moved back into place. Amber Murphy had been on shift since before the sun came up. She was 25, in uniform soaked in patches from the shoulders down, and not particularly interested in small talk. Her ponytail was loose, her cheeks pink from cold, and her sleeves damp where she had pushed carts all morning long. There was no one else outside. She preferred it that way. She had just lined up the last few carts when she noticed something. A flash of yellow, something small moving out of the corner of her eye. She turned her head and squinted. A toddler. Wandering, alone. Amber's heart skipped. The girl, no more than 2 years old, wore a light yellow sweater and mismatched shoes, and she was giggling softly as she toddled into the open aisle between 2 rows of parked cars. Amber's eyes followed her path. The girl's little feet splashed through a shallow puddle. Her arms flailed a little to keep balance. Amber's gaze snapped forward to a black pickup truck. Its taillights were glowing red. It had just started backing up. "Hey!" Amber shouted, voice rising fast. "Hey, stop!" She dropped the cart handle, already moving. Her boots hit the wet pavement hard, sending droplets flying behind her. The world narrowed. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just ran. Inside a silver SUV across the lot, James Harrison had just looked up from his tablet. His day had begun with a call, a text, 2 emails, and an unanswered voicemail from someone he didn't want to deal with before breakfast. He reached for his coffee, then looked through the windshield just in time to see his daughter. Agnes. His heart slammed against his ribs. "Agnes!" he shouted, flinging the car door open with shaking hands. But he was on the far side of the lot. He'd parked at a distance so she wouldn't see him on the call. He hadn't planned for this. His legs stumbled over the doorframe as he tried to sprint, but he didn't make it halfway across before it happened. Amber reached the girl just as the bumper came within inches of her tiny knees. She didn't stop. She dropped low, scooped the child up into her arms, and pivoted hard. The truck screeched, brakes locking. A shopping cart released during Amber's sprint, rolled loose, and smacked into the side panel with a sharp metallic clang, dragging across the paint with a long squeal. The toddler cried out but wasn't hurt. Amber held her close, both of them, wide-eyed, still crouched in the center of the lane, soaked and trembling. The truck stopped fully. A moment passed. Then the driver door opened, and a man in a windbreaker stormed out. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked, gesturing wildly at the truck. "Look what you did." Amber slowly stood, holding the child tightly to her chest. The girl clung to her shoulder, whimpering, tears mixing with the light rain still falling. Amber's hair had come loose, strands clinging to her cheeks. Her breath was short, but her voice stayed firm. "You didn't see her," she said. "She was right behind you." "Yeah, and now I've got a scratch the size of my arm on my truck because you threw a cart into it." Amber blinked in disbelief. Her arms tightened around the child. "I didn't throw anything. I saved her." "She wasn't your kid," he snapped. "No." "But I didn't wait for someone else to act?" she replied, her voice rising just enough to slice through the air between them. "You should be glad she's alive." James finally reached them, nearly breathless. His coat had caught on the SUV door earlier, and he had lost a few seconds wrestling free. His hair was damp, face pale, and his arms reached out instinctively. "Agnes," he gasped, voice raw. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Amber looked at him stunned for a moment, then put the pieces together. This was her father. Agnes immediately reached toward James, her arms eager, trusting. Amber passed her over gently, still catching her breath. James held the child close to his chest, kissing the side of her head, scanning for injuries. Thank you," he said, eyes locked on Amber. "Thank you." Amber looked at him directly. There was no smile, no nod, just the exhaustion and intensity of someone who had nearly seen a life lost. "Watch her better," she said quietly. "Next time, someone might not be there." She turned away, but before she could walk off, the pickup driver threw his hands up again. "So she just walks away. That's it," He pointed at his truck, his tone growing louder. "She scratched my paint, man. Who's paying for this?" James turned his head slowly. He looked at the man, then down at his daughter, then back at Amber's retreating figure. His jaw clenched once. "I'll cover it," James said, loud enough to be heard clearly. The man blinked. "What I said, I'll pay for it. Just send me the bill." The driver scoffed, sizing up James's tailored coat and expensive shoes. "Damn right you will," he muttered, stepping back toward his truck, grumbling under his breath. James didn't respond. His focus was on the woman now walking briskly toward the store entrance, soaked through her steps, firm, her back straight. She didn't look back. The automatic doors opened without a sound, swallowed her whole, and closed again. No one had filmed it. No one clapped. The lot had a few witnesses: an old man loading groceries, a woman buckling a child into a car seat, but no one moved. The rain picked up slightly, turning the gray morning heavier. James stood alone now, Agnes in his arms, warm and alive, still clutching her small stuffed bear. His mind raced not with political strategy or morning schedules, but with a sharp, painful question that cut deep. What if she hadn't seen her? What if he had waited 3 seconds longer to look up? What if the only reason his daughter was still breathing was a woman whose name he didn't even know? He pressed his lips to Agnes's forehead and held her tighter. The cold didn't bother him anymore. The scratch on the truck didn't matter. But the image of that woman's face, so steady, so unshaken, had already imprinted itself on his mind. And he had a feeling it wasn't going to fade. The rain had dried by the time Amber returned to her shift the next afternoon. The automatic doors of Brookline Mart whooshed open, welcoming in the usual crowd of late-day shoppers and their half-filled carts. Amber had tied her hair up tighter today, trying to keep focus, but her eyes kept drifting toward the wide glass windows at the front of the store, where the reflection of the parking lot shimmered under a faded sun. She hadn't talked about what happened that morning. No manager mentioned it. No news crew showed up. It was as if saving a child from getting crushed under a reversing truck was just another Tuesday. She was restocking paper towels when a familiar figure appeared at the end of the aisle. James Harrison, sharply dressed as ever, with less drizzle in his hair, but the same quiet tension in his shoulders. He was holding a cream-colored envelope in his hand. Amber straightened slowly. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. Amber looked at the envelope, then at him. "You already did." "No, I didn't," James said. "Not really." He offered her the envelope. Amber didn't take it. "What's in it?" A gesture, James said carefully. "A small token of appreciation for what you did for Agnes." Amber wiped her palms on her apron. "You think this?" She motioned at the envelope. "Balances what happened." "It's not about balance," James replied. "It's about gratitude." "I didn't do it to be thanked," Amber said. Her voice was steady but cool. She was in danger. "I moved, that's all." James stood silent, unsure what to say next. Amber reached for another roll of paper towels and shelved it slowly. Her eyes didn't meet his. A customer, a woman in her late 50s with pearls and a stiff blouse, passed by just in time to catch the exchange. She glanced at Amber, then at the envelope in James's hand. Turning down money like that, the woman muttered under her breath, "Some people really think they're too proud for help these days." Amber froze. James turned toward the woman, his jaw tightening slightly, but he said nothing. The woman walked off. Amber set the final roll in place and looked back at James. "You really think I'd take money for saving a kid's life?" she said. "Do people like me usually do that in your world?" "No," James admitted. "They don't. Most people in my world wouldn't have even noticed her walking into the street." Amber stared at him for a long beat. Then she pushed the envelope gently back toward him. "Keep it." James took it, nodded once, and left without another word. Later that week, a warmer afternoon rolled in, and Amber walked through the city park near her apartment, carrying a tote bag full of craft supplies for the kids' weekend reading group. She led a handful of them through a paper kite-making activity, crouched low in the grass as small hands tugged on string and tape. From across the green, a familiar voice squealed. Amber turned just in time to see a blur of curls and chubby legs running toward her. Agnes. The little girl didn't say much, not in full sentences, but she wrapped her tiny arms around Amber's leg and giggled as she looked up. "Hi," she chirped, then held out a half-melted cookie. Amber knelt down, surprised, but smiled. "Hey there, sunshine." A moment later, James caught up, slightly winded, clearly not expecting the sprint. He saw Agnes clinging to her leg and froze for a beat. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said. "I run these weekend groups for the neighborhood kids," Amber replied. "Keeps them off screens and out of traffic." James offered a faint smile. "She saw you from across the park and just took off." "She's quick," Amber said, ruffling Agnes's hair. "And brave." There was a pause. James shifted awkwardly, then sat on the edge of the nearby bench. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "I said a lot," Amber answered, standing now, dusting off her jeans. "You told me not to count on luck next time." "You were right," he said. "I didn't move. I froze. If you hadn't been there." "But I was," she interrupted, "and she's okay. That's what matters." Agnes was busy poking a paper butterfly on Amber's bag, mumbling a tune only she understood. Amber looked at her, then at James. "She deserves someone who sees her," Amber said, "not someone who assumes someone else always will." James looked away, eyes tightening. "I want to be that person." Amber didn't answer. She just bent down, kissed Agnes on the forehead, and handed her the butterfly cutout. "I've got a group to finish," she said. "Take care of her." James nodded. Agnes waved as she was lifted into his arms. She looked back at Amber, smiling. "Bye-bye," she said. Amber waved. "See you around, Agnes." As James walked away, he looked back once. Amber was kneeling again in the grass, surrounded by children, the afternoon sun casting shadows around her like quiet halos. She wasn't trying to make a point. She was just doing what needed to be done. And somehow that spoke louder than anything else he'd heard all week. There was a time when Amber Murphy thought she had a future mapped out, not grand, not glamorous, but meaningful. A classroom of her own, a circle of kids, a stack of books worn at the edges from being passed from hand to hand. She didn't dream of fame or money, just the steady rhythm of teaching, building confidence, one sentence at a time. That future began at Southridge State in a second-hand hoodie with a borrowed laptop sitting near the back of a classroom where the walls were bright, but the air always felt a little colder when she raised her hand. Her professors were cordial, not cruel, but somehow she was always invisible. Not unkindly, so just easily overlooked. Her name, Amber Murphy, simple and clear, still got misread almost every semester. More than once it had been swapped for Angela or Amira during roll call. She'd correct them politely at first. The second time, she'd repeat herself louder. The third time, she'd stay silent and let it go. It wasn't that they meant harm, but it left her feeling misplaced, as if she was never fully there, as if the world around her kept trying to make her someone else. She remembered vividly one of her education theory classes where she contributed an idea about trauma-informed learning. The professor nodded, then turned and asked a white student in the row ahead to expand on his point, as if Amber's voice had only mattered once it came from a different mouth. It was small things constantly, getting assigned the classroom furthest from campus for her practicum, never being asked to lead group presentations even when she was more prepared, being passed over for research assistant roles. But the moment that burned the longest happened during the spring of her second year. She had applied for a prestigious scholarship offered by the Department of Education for students with strong GPAs and leadership potential. Amber had both. She'd tutored at local libraries, organized reading nights for kids in underserved communities, and carried a full course load with high marks. She even stayed late helping peers study, earning her informal praise from faculty. Still, when the winners were announced, her name wasn't there. Instead, a classmate who had missed 3 group projects and once called a school in the Bronx a war zone got it. When she asked about it, the response was vague. "You're an impressive candidate," the administrator said, smiling tightly, "but we felt someone else aligned more clearly with our leadership profile." She nodded slowly, pressing her tongue to the roof of her mouth to keep from asking what exactly that profile looked like. Later in the hallway, she heard the same classmate laughing about how easy it was to charm the panel. They love it when you play the humble hero card. That summer, during her practicum, things started to slide even further. Amber was placed at Brook Meadow Preschool, a suburban center with pastel walls and parents who wore pearls to pick up their toddlers. On her first day, a woman handed her a mop bucket by mistake. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, blinking at Amber. "I thought you were the janitorial help." The director chuckled awkwardly, offering no correction. Amber shook it off, focusing on the kids. She loved their curiosity, their honesty. But even there, her every move seemed under watch. If she gently corrected a child, it was labeled too stern. If she stood firm in a circle activity, a teacher later suggested she smile more. The kids respond better when you're less intense, the woman offered voice, syrupy sweet. On her midterm evaluation, her classroom management was rated effective, but a final comment said she might consider softening her tone to be more approachable. Then came the day she found out her mother had fallen again. The tremors had started earlier that year, and after rounds of confusion and misdiagnosis, doctors finally named it Parkinson's early onset. Amber sat outside the neurology wing of St. Vincent's with her hands shaking, watching the buses go by as she thought about what came next. Her mother had no one else. Her brother was still in high school, and the only family nearby was a distant cousin who sent Christmas texts once a year. She didn't make a scene. She didn't cry in the dean's office or beg for an extension. She just stopped coming. The tuition bills didn't stop, of course, but the calls from Southridge faded eventually, especially after she officially dropped out. Her email inbox turned from class notifications to job alerts. She applied to Brookline Mart the day after she moved back home. Amber folded her uniform shirt on the same desk that once held printed lesson plans and childhood education textbooks, stacking her life into smaller, quieter routines. It didn't happen all at once, but day by day the dream hardened into something like silence. She stopped telling people she used to study education. She started introducing herself just as Amber from checkout. It was easier than explaining where she had been headed. Still, there were moments where the spark returned when a mother handed her child a coupon book, and the kid asked, "Why does it say save here if everything costs money?" Amber laughed and explained how marketing worked, and the child stared up at her wide-eyed, like she had just explained the moon. That look of learning, of realization, still stirred something old in her chest. And sometimes that feeling came back through the most unexpected places. Like that afternoon, just a week after the parking lot incident, when a boy about 10 years old walked up to her register with a comic book and a backpack full of change. He squinted at her name tag, then grinned. "Miss Murphy?" he asked. Amber blinked. "Yes, I think you helped me read last summer. At the church camp, you had the big flashcards with colors." She smiled, memory unlocking. "Jamal," he nodded proudly. "I'm reading chapter books now. My teacher says I'm good at it." "That's amazing," she said. Her voice caught a little. She tried not to let it show. "My mom says thank you. She said you should have been a teacher." Amber didn't know what to say to that. She nodded instead and carefully rang up his comic. When he left, she turned to the window, letting the soft hum of the store drown out her thoughts. There had been a time she was on track to become someone else, not someone more important, just someone more fully herself. But somewhere along the line, the world made it clear that some doors look open until you try to walk through them. And by the time you realize they weren't meant for you, you're too tired to knock again. Outside, the sky was turning gray again. Rain was likely. Amber took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and went back to work, unaware that someone had been watching her from the corner of the store. James Harrison, standing near the end of aisle 6 holding a box of cereal, still unsure how someone who had every reason to give up still showed up with that kind of grace. The next morning unfolded like any other at Brookline Mart, rows of fluorescent lights, humming above the smell of overripe bananas wafting from produce, the buzz of barcode scanners filling the stale air. Amber Murphy stood by the front display, her red vest slightly faded, stacking canned soup into a pyramid that had already toppled once that week. Her wrists ached, but she moved with practiced efficiency. No one noticed. That was the point. No one ever noticed. Then came a silence that didn't belong. She looked up. James Harrison was standing by the entrance, not in his usual tailored jacket, not flanked by aides or with a phone to his ear. Just a dark shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow and khaki pants that looked like they'd been ironed but not fussed over. He held nothing but a cup of coffee, the cardboard sleeve already stained from a long grip. For a beat, Amber froze, her chest tightened, instinct bristling. She expected him to say something rehearsed, to make some grand gesture, to deliver another envelope or speech. But James simply gave a slight nod and walked past the registers, heading toward the stockroom with a quiet sense of purpose. No announcement, no explanation. 10 minutes later, Amber caught him near the loading dock, struggling with a dolly stacked with bags of dog food. He grunted, trying to angle the wheels around a box of toilet paper. "You're gonna pop a disc if you bend like that," she said flatly, arms crossed. He looked up sheepish. "Noted. What are you doing here, James? Helping? You don't work here." "No, but I should know what it means to show up." Amber watched him for a moment, her face unreadable. She wasn't impressed, but she didn't tell him to leave. Instead, she tossed him a pair of gloves. "Then start with freezer crates. Don't stack 'em sideways. They slide. The hours moved strangely after that. James, a man who once orchestrated federal budgets and spoke to national press on live television, now wiped up spilled yogurt from aisle 4. He stocked soup beside her without a word. He broke down boxes, wheeled carts, lifted bent sweated. At first, staff whispered. Then they just let it be. Some customers gawked. An older white woman, mid-60s, clutched her purse tighter as James passed her eyes, darting to Amber. "Is he filming a commercial or something?" the woman asked. "No," Amber replied, not looking up. "Just a guy learning what it's like to work without applause." Near noon, while the floor buzzed with pre-lunch traffic, Amber and James shared a brief break behind the backroom partition. He sat on a crate wiping his forehead with a napkin. Amber stood, arms folded. "You didn't answer my question. Why are you really here?" James exhaled. "Because when you refused that envelope, I realized something that embarrassed me. You saw value in something I forgot how to see, and you thought stocking shelves would redeem you." "No," he said. "I thought it might teach me how not to look away." She studied him, her gaze sharp but not cruel. "This isn't a redemption arc, James. This is my job, my real life." He nodded. "I know." A pause. "Then keep stacking," she said. By mid-afternoon, the sun had heated the front display so much the cans were warm to the touch. James was kneeling beside Amber, trying to balance a lopsided row of tomato soup, when a man in a golf shirt and loafers stopped short in front of them. The man's eyes narrowed. "You're James Harrison," he said. James glanced up, squinting. "That I am. What the hell are you doing here?" "Working." The man gave a short, incredulous laugh. "That's rich. Is this some kind of PR stunt? This your next campaign play?" Amber watched James carefully. His jaw twitched, but his voice remained steady. "No cameras, no campaign, just work." The man looked at Amber now, his tone sharpening. "You letting him use you for optics?" Amber stood up. Her voice was calm, cold. "He's not using anything. You can move along." The man muttered something about reverse virtue signaling and walked off. James stood slowly, brushing off his knees. "I used to talk like that guy. I used to believe I knew everything." "You didn't," Amber said. "No, I didn't." That night, after the last cart was rolled back and the final register beeped its goodbye, James stayed to clean the break room floor. No one asked him to. He used an old mop with a handle that squeaked and a bucket that smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee. Amber stood at the door, watching him. "You missed a spot," she said. James looked up, wiped his brow. "Still learning." She tilted her head. "Why does it matter to you this? Me? Any of it?" He leaned on the mop. "Because for once, I'm not trying to fix something. I'm trying to understand it." Amber nodded slowly. "Then start with this. No matter how long you mop that floor, I still have to walk out that door tomorrow and deal with people who won't see me unless I save their child." James's eyes didn't flinch. "Then let me be someone who does see you." For the first time that day, Amber smiled, just a flicker. "You don't get points for that," she said, not asking for any. She let that settle in the air, then turned. "Don't be late tomorrow. The morning truck's a beast. Wouldn't miss it." James replied, returning to the mop. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The floor gleamed in patches. And in the silence of a closed store, a man once built for press rooms and podiums stood alone, with a mop in hand, scrubbing away something no one else could see. Something that for the first time actually mattered. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and something stale. Not unpleasant, but tired. The kind of smell that clung to air vents and vinyl seats and lived quietly in the folds of 2 long days. James Harrison stepped out of the neurology ward at Western Mercy Hospital, adjusting his cuffs absent-mindedly. The visit had been brief, just a handshake and a promise to review the funding for a senior care program, but it left him feeling strangely hollow. Outside the ward's double doors, he spotted her, Amber Murphy. She sat slumped in one of the molded plastic chairs along the wall, her red Brookline Mart jacket folded in her lap, head resting against the wall. Her posture wasn't dramatic. It wasn't collapsed in exhaustion. It was just still. Still in a way that made James stop walking. Her arms were crossed over her chest. Her shoes, cheap canvas ones with worn soles, were planted firm on the floor, but her fingers twitched as if even in sleep she was waiting for the next task. Next shift, next fire to put out. He didn't speak. He didn't want to startle her. Instead, he turned and walked quietly to the vending machine around the corner. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 foam cups of vending machine coffee, one half full, the other nearly spilling over. She stirred, then blinked her eyes open, disoriented. When she saw him, her body tensed not with fear, but readiness. She sat up straighter, wiping the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. "You following me now?" she asked. Her voice was dry, but not unkind. James extended the cup. "You looked like you needed something terrible to drink." She took it slowly, sniffed it, then gave a half-smile. "Still better than the sludge I make at home." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that wasn't awkward, just aware. The hallway around them buzzed faintly with intercom calls, soft footsteps, and the shuffle of gurneys in the distance. After a long pause, Amber finally spoke. "She's inside," she said, nodding toward the neurology door. "My mom. Some days she forgets what year it is. Some days she remembers every poem she ever taught. Today's somewhere in between." James didn't respond immediately. He just held the coffee in his hands, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. "She was a teacher?" he asked. Amber nodded. "High school literature. Taught for over 20 years. She used to make me memorize Maya Angelou and Morrison like they were Bible verses." He smiled faintly. "Sounds like she was serious about it." "She was," Amber said. Then her tone changed subtly. "She lost her job when the school board started pulling controversial authors. Said Toni Morrison made the white kids uncomfortable. She refused to change the curriculum. Said you don't raise critical thinkers by hiding the truth." James's eyes narrowed slightly, not in judgment, but in quiet disbelief. "They fired her for that." "They didn't call it firing," Amber replied. "They said she was reassigned until she took early retirement. Then the symptoms started, tremors, forgetfulness. By the time they diagnosed it, it had already eaten through half of who she was." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't cry. She just sipped the coffee as if that would anchor her to something solid. James didn't offer a platitude, didn't say sorry. He'd learned enough in the last few days to know that "I'm sorry" sometimes felt like an escape hatch for the person saying it. Instead, he asked, "Do you come here often?" "Every week. Twice if I can manage. She doesn't always know who I am, but she relaxes when I read to her. Still likes poetry. Doesn't always understand it, but it's like music to her brain. That's..." He paused, searching. "That's love." Amber looked at him, really looked, not with suspicion, but curiosity. Her eyes studied him like she was trying to see whether the words had weight behind them or if they were just something polished he'd picked up from years of public speaking. "She was the reason I went to college," Amber said finally. "Wanted to be a teacher like her. I was almost done, just needed a year and a half, but she got sick. Bills piled up. I couldn't keep both of us afloat, so here I am." "That's not nothing," James said quietly. "That's survival. That's sacrifice." Amber gave a soft snort. "You say that like it's noble. It's just what people do when they don't have choices." "Or when they have too many responsibilities," James offered. They sat in silence again, this one longer, the kind of silence that carried a strange understanding. James looked at the sterile white walls, the peeling corner of a bulletin board that no one had fixed, the flicker of a fluorescent bulb overhead. Hospitals were supposed to heal, but often they were just rooms where hard truths sat down beside you and waited to be acknowledged. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "Not for saving my daughter. I've said that. But for not letting me walk through this world thinking my perspective was the only one that mattered." Amber blinked. "That's unexpected." "Yeah," he admitted. "It's new for me too." She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased. Her voice was quieter now. "You know, back in school, the professors always praised the kids who said the most words in class, the ones who argued loudly. But my mom used to say the best students were the ones who knew how to sit still and actually listen." James looked at her and nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'm finally learning." When a nurse appeared from behind the ward doors and called Amber's name, she stood, adjusting her jacket. "I should go in," she said. "Of course." James stood too. She hesitated, then added, "She likes Morrison the most. Her favorite line is, 'You are your best thing.' I try to remind her of that." "Maybe one day you can remind me too," he said, and he meant it. She didn't answer, just gave a soft nod and disappeared through the door. James stood there for a moment longer, the coffee cooling in his hands, the hallway quieter than before. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man with answers, and that oddly felt right. It was late afternoon when Amber stepped out of the staff door behind Brookline Mart, the day's final lights slanting across the loading dock. The air was heavy with that post-rain smell, wet asphalt, damp cardboard, and something faintly floral from the grocery's outdoor plants display. She wiped her hands on her apron, too tired to notice the black smudges on her skin. That morning, she'd barely gotten 4 hours of sleep after visiting her mother at the hospital. Now, all she wanted was to head home, heat up leftovers, and not speak to a single soul until morning. But someone was waiting by the parking lot's edge. Amber recognized him instantly, even without the sleek car or the crowd of handlers. James Harrison stood alone wearing a navy windbreaker and jeans that still somehow looked expensive. His hair was slightly tousled and his expression was harder to read than usual, not polished, not distant, just quiet. "You really don't get tired of showing up uninvited, huh?" she said, voice low but not sharp. James smiled, just a little, not quite smug. "Depends. Are you going to throw a cantaloupe at me this time?" She snorted and crossed her arms. "Depends. Are you here to offer me more money I didn't ask for?" "No," he said, more serious now. "I'm here to offer you a job." Amber blinked. That wasn't what she expected. She didn't reply right away, so he continued. "I want to build something. A place for kids like Agnes and 100 others who won't have someone sprinting to pull them out of the road. A place that teaches more than just math and grammar. Real things, confidence, resilience, how to speak, how to listen, how to feel safe in a world that's not made for them." Amber raised one brow, skeptical but curious. "And what does that have to do with me? I need someone to help build it, from scratch. I'm not just looking for teachers or donors. I need someone who understands what it's like to come up through the cracks. Someone who'll tell me when I'm wrong and doesn't care if I'm offended. Someone who actually believes in what the place could become." Amber stared at him. For once, he wasn't selling anything. His voice didn't rise for effect. He wasn't trying to sound inspiring. He just looked tired, like a man asking for help in a language he was still learning. "What's the catch?" she asked. "Come to one meeting," he said. "Just one. Tomorrow. Midtown office. You don't have to say anything. Just listen." Amber looked at him long and hard. Then, without saying yes or no, she turned and walked to her car. The next day, she showed up. Not for him, at least that's what she told herself, but because she wanted to know how far the illusion went. She wore jeans, a plain shirt, and didn't bother with makeup. She wasn't there to impress anyone. Inside the sleek Midtown conference room, all glass and polished concrete, a dozen people were already seated. James sat at the head, looking far more like the version of him she'd seen on campaign flyers. He nodded at her, but didn't interrupt when she took a seat in the back. The meeting began. Talk of brand positioning, community partnerships, and public narrative arcs filled the room like background noise. A young white woman in a beige blazer tapped her tablet and spoke with too much enthusiasm. "If we integrate Amber's story into the launch campaign, we could pivot the media narrative from controversy to compassion, a redemption arc for Harrison, and a human face for the initiative." Amber didn't flinch, but the words hit like a slap. She stood up quietly and walked out. No one stopped her. Outside, she didn't cry. She didn't scream, but her hands shook. 10 minutes later, James came jogging after her, breath a little uneven. "Amber," she turned on him, "you brought me here to be a prop, a tragic face for your redemption story." "No," he said, voice firm. "I didn't know they were going to say that. I swear." "But you didn't stop them either," she shot back. "You just sat there. You let them plan how to turn my life into a headline." James looked gutted. For a second, all the words he normally had, the arguments, the strategies, they all vanished. "I didn't stop them," he admitted, "because part of me was afraid you'd leave before I could even explain." "Explain what?" she demanded. He ran a hand through his hair. "That I'm not trying to save my campaign. I'm trying to save myself from going back to being the man who stood there and watched his daughter almost die without moving. I don't need you to clean up my image. I need you to keep me from forgetting what matters." Amber didn't answer right away. Her heart was pounding, not from anger, but from the awful, unfamiliar ache of someone saying something honest when she least expected it. She looked at him, really looked, not the suit, not the politician, just the man. "I don't trust you," she said quietly. "Fair," he replied. "And I don't want cameras, or speeches, or someone turning my name into a hashtag. Understood. If I come back to that room, it's not for you. It's for the kids." James nodded. "That's more than enough." Amber took a long breath. Then she turned and walked away again. But this time, she didn't walk as fast, and James, for the first time in a long time, felt like maybe he hadn't ruined everything. That night, Amber sat at her kitchen table, notebook open. She stared at the blank page, then slowly wrote one line. What does it mean to belong? She didn't have the answer. Not yet. But for the first time in years, she was willing to ask the question out loud. The night after the meeting, Amber sat at her kitchen table with her mother's old planner, open flipping through the months, with dry fingers and tired eyes. The calendar was dotted with dates from a life pause, doctor appointments, grocery reminders, scribbles about school. At the corner of a page in her mother's faded pen was a quote, "You teach not because you must, but because you remember being invisible." She stared at it for a long while. Then she reached for her laptop and began the application to retake the certification exam. Getting certified again wasn't easy. It meant night classes reading until her eyes burned and essays that asked her to describe teaching philosophies in under 500 words. She did it anyway. After her shifts at the store, after the center meetings, after visiting her mother at the rehab facility. She'd fall asleep on the couch, highlighter in hand, then wake up at sunrise to squeeze in another paragraph. Meanwhile, the old community center on Grover Street slowly turned into something new. James had kept his word, no cameras, no headlines, just quiet renovations, donated furniture, and volunteers who came not for publicity, but because they believed. Amber didn't announce she would teach. She simply showed up. Room B still had peeling paint and a cracked whiteboard, but it had windows that let in light and kids who kept coming back. The first week, she taught 6 students. By the third week, there were 14. They came from all over, some on bikes, some led by older siblings, a few dropped off by tired parents in silent cars. They came with worn backpacks, mismatched shoes, and questions they didn't always know how to ask. Amber didn't teach them like a curriculum told her to. She taught them how to listen, how to ask why, how to write their names like they mattered, how to say, "I'm scared," and not feel ashamed. One girl named Alana used to flinch every time someone raised their voice, even when it wasn't angry. Amber noticed. She never called on her directly. Instead, she gave her quiet tasks, praised her drawings, and left short notes like, "You notice what others miss. That's a gift." After a month, Alana began raising her hand, not just to answer, but to ask. That day, Amber stayed late, erased the board slower than usual, heartful in a way she hadn't felt in years. James came by occasionally. He never interrupted. He stood in the back, hands in his pockets, watching. Sometimes he brought snacks. Sometimes he helped fix a wobbly chair. But mostly, he just listened. One evening, after the last student had left, he asked her quietly, "Do you miss the classroom?" Amber didn't answer right away. She was wiping down desks, stacking notebooks. "I missed what it could have been," she said. "Not the system, not the rules, just the part where a kid sees themselves for the first time and realizes they're not broken." James nodded. "That's the part I never knew existed." She looked up at him. "Most people don't. That's the problem." That night, Amber drove home in silence. No music, no calls, just the sound of tires on asphalt and a quiet heart sorting itself out. She passed the neighborhood where she grew up, slowed down as she neared her old elementary school. The building was dark, the flag outside faded, but she remembered the room where her mother had once taught. She remembered the smell of chalk and paper, the way her mother's voice had filled that space. Back at home, Amber sat on the edge of her bed and opened her notebook. On one page, she wrote, "Today Marcus learned how to apologize without fear, and I remembered what it meant to be seen." She taped a drawing to her mirror, a gift from a student named Maya. It was crooked drawn with markers on lined paper, but it showed a woman in glasses with a big smile and a speech bubble that read, "You matter, even when you mess up." Amber looked at it every morning before leaving. This time, teaching wasn't about lesson plans. It wasn't about grades or performance reviews. It was about rebuilding something that should never have been taken from her in the first place. And doing it in a room that smelled like old wood and second chances. There were no headlines, no applause. But in that quiet corner of Edenbridge, Amber Murphy became a teacher again, not by permission, but by presence. Not because someone gave her a second shot, but because she took it. And every time a child said, "Miss Amber, can I tell you something?" she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. It started with a chair. Not a fancy one, just a soft blue beanbag Agnes had picked out with a shy point at a thrift store. James sat on the floor next to it, arms awkwardly wrapped around his knees, while Agnes curled up in the chair, a picture book open across her lap. He didn't read to her. Not at first. He listened as she mumbled her way through the story, skipping words, making up parts, giggling at her own nonsense. He smiled not because it was perfect, but because she wasn't afraid to be imperfect with him. That was new. James used to think parenting was about direction, correction, control, schedules, bedtime routines, nutritious meals laid out like a presentation. But Amber's words from weeks ago echoed now each time he started to correct her. Are you being a father or a manager? He had laughed then defensively, but now, as he watched Agnes hold her stuffed bunny like it was a lifeline, he realized he had been doing more managing than fathering. So he changed things little by little. He stopped checking his phone during dinner. He let her help stir the pasta, even though she spilled it twice. He let bedtime stories stretch long past lights out if she asked for just one more page. One night, as they sat by the window, listening to the rain, Agnes whispered, I saw Mommy in my dream. She had a yellow dress. James froze. The truth felt sharp like ice cracking down his spine. He wanted to explain, to say something wise, something polished, but the words tangled. So he did what Amber had taught him. He sat in the moment. He placed a hand on her tiny back and said quietly, That's a beautiful dream. Amber's guidance had been subtle, never lecturing. When he asked her once how to talk about loss, she just said, You don't need a script. You need to sit in the truth without rushing to fix it. He'd written that down. It sounded simple. It wasn't. But he practiced. When Agnes had her first meltdown over a lost sock, screaming fists clenched tears like a storm, James knelt beside her instead of sending her to her room. He breathed with her, counted slowly, told her it was okay to be mad, but it was also okay to let the mad pass. She looked at him with wide, tear-streaked eyes, sniffled, and said, I'm mad, but I still love you. On Saturday mornings, he made pancakes, always burning the first batch. They built pillow forts. He learned the theme songs to all her favorite shows, even sang them out of tune. She started calling him Silly Daddy, and sometimes, when sleepy, My Daddy. The possessive melted something in him each time. There were setbacks. Of course there were. One evening, after a long day, he snapped at her for spilling juice on his paperwork. She flinched. It was small, a reflex, but he saw it, and it gutted him. Later that night, after she was asleep, he sat on the couch, stared at the dark TV screen, and cried for the first time in years. Not because of her, but because he realized how much he had missed, how many moments he had traded for status updates, meetings, flights, headlines. He called Amber the next day. I messed up. I yelled. Not a lot, just it was sharp. And she pulled back like she expected worse. Amber didn't judge. She listened, then said, Then today you try again. That's the only way. You show her that the loud isn't the end, that love stays. That evening, James knelt by Agnes's bed and apologized. No excuses, no justifying. I got angry, and I scared you. That wasn't okay. You didn't do anything wrong. Agnes didn't say much. She blinked slowly, then whispered, No more shout, just hugs. He nodded. Just hugs. Later that week, she got a cold. Not serious, but enough to make her clingy, feverish. In the past, he would have called a nanny, rearranged his schedule, maybe popped in for an hour. This time he canceled everything. Sat with her through the night, cool cloth on her forehead, reading soft stories. At one point around 3 a.m, as she dozed against his chest, he whispered, Daddy didn't know how to do this before. I'm learning okay. She stirred, murmured something, and he could have sworn it was, You good now, Daddy. He didn't know if she meant it. He chose to believe it. Sunday afternoon, they painted together in the backyard. Finger paint's messy hand smears across the patio. Agnes drew a stick figure with big glasses and a smile, holding hands with a smaller one. Who's this? James asked, pointing. Me. And Miss Amber. She make me brave. James nodded. She's good at that. Agnes looked up. You learning too, Daddy? James took a long breath. Every day. Amber came by later, dropped off books for Agnes. James thanked her at the door, and for the first time the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was something like trust. You're doing all right, Amber said. She's teaching me, he replied. Both of you are. Amber gave a small smile. Then don't stop showing up. That's the real lesson. And he didn't. Not perfectly, but honestly. Fully. The man who once stood behind microphones now stood in line for juice boxes, knelt for bedtime stories, learned the rhythm of a child's breath in sleep. Not because he had something to prove, but because he had someone to become. Fatherhood, he realized, wasn't something you inherit. It was something you build, brick by clumsy brick. And every bedtime hug, every whispered apology, every giggle-filled pancake morning, that was him laying the foundation. One day, maybe years from now, Agnes would forget the specifics, but James hoped she would remember the feeling safe, seen, loved, and that would be enough. 1 year. It had been 1 full year since the center reopened its doors with no ribbon, no podium, and no photo ops. But the work had taken root. And now, on a Saturday morning that smelled like overripe apples and coffee from mismatched thermoses, the building on Grover Street was full in a different way. Folding chairs lined the walls, paper decorations swayed from thumbtacks on the ceiling. The children were buzzing with energy, their voices bouncing off the old tile floor as they carried trays of homemade cupcakes, cartons of juice, and poster boards splashed with color. It wasn't a gala. It wasn't meant to be. It was a thank you. Quiet, honest, undeniably human. Amber sat near the back of the room with her hands in her lap fingers, lightly clasped, watching the kids set up with an efficiency that came from trust, not instruction. There was no microphone, just a small speaker someone had borrowed from the church down the road. Someone offered to bring balloons, but Amber gently declined. They'll just pop. Instead, the walls were lined with drawings. One showed a girl holding hands with a tall, brown-skinned woman under a sky labeled in shaky crayon, "I feel safe here." James stood near the snack table, carefully pouring lemonade into paper cups. He wore jeans and a blue sweater, no suit, no tie, and most importantly, no script in his pocket. Amber had insisted no speeches, no cameras, just people. The program began with a simple welcome from one of the older students. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied halfway through. Then came music off-key, heartfelt, and a short group poem written during one of Amber's classes. But it was Agnes who stole the quiet. She stood in front of the crowd in a pink dress, her shoes slightly untied, clutching a paper that Amber had folded with her the night before. She looked up, eyes scanning the room, like she wasn't quite sure what to expect. Then she read. Miss Amber listens with her eyes. Agnes said, her voice small but steady. She makes my mad go away. She helps me say the things that don't have names. A few gasps, some smiles, and then silence, thick, grateful still. Amber didn't move. Her hands stayed in her lap, but her chest rose just a little higher. James stepped forward, not because it was his turn, but because he had something to say, and for once no one told him to say it. I used to think the loudest person in the room had the most power, he began. But I've learned that some of the most important things happen in quiet corners, in folding chairs, in hand-drawn name tags. He turned toward Amber, who now looked up. I was a man who thought he understood leadership, but I didn't understand listening. Not until I met a woman who saved my daughter, challenged my pride, and built something stronger than any office I've ever held. Amber didn't blush. She didn't nod. She just exhaled slowly. I want to thank Miss Amber, James continued, for reminding me that kindness doesn't need an audience, and that change, real change, starts where people are seen, not where they're shown. There was no applause, just a quiet shift in the room, like something sacred had been shared and understood. Afterward, people milled about, slowly reluctant to leave. A grandmother hugged Amber without saying a word. A teenage boy asked if the center would have summer hours. Someone handed James a tray of leftover brownies and said, "You're better like this." Amber found herself by the bulletin board straightening a drawing that had started to curl. She smiled as she read a child's scrawl. "This place helps me be loud without yelling." James joined her. "That was a good line," he said softly. She nodded. "They teach me more than I teach them." "You know," he added, "we didn't fix everything." "No," she said, "but we started something, and sometimes that's enough." They didn't talk much after that. The sun dipped lower. The last of the kids were picked up. Someone turned off the speaker, and the room returned to what it was most days, quiet, waiting, full of something unspoken and strong. Amber walked to the door, pausing before stepping outside. James held it open for her. Agnes, still clutching her poem, skipped ahead. As the door shut behind them, a new drawing fluttered to the floor. A figure with brown skin and a chalkboard stood next to a small child. Above them, in blocky letters, it said, "You don't have to be loud to matter." Amber picked it up, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her coat pocket. Then, without a word, she took Agnes's hand, and together they walked into the evening air. No lights, no cameras, just a small girl, a quiet woman, and a man finally learning to walk beside them instead of ahead. It had rained lightly the night before, just enough to darken the earth and leave the grass soft underfoot. By late morning, the sky over Edenbridge was a calm, colorless blue stretched wide above the quiet park at the edge of town. There was no event scheduled. No one had booked the space. But Amber had packed a small picnic, a second blanket, and a plastic container of sliced apples just in case. Agnes was the first to run across the field, a blur of pink sneakers and curls bouncing behind her. She stopped suddenly by a tree stump, crouched and pointed at something in the grass. "Bug," she announced proudly. Amber smiled as she knelt beside her. "Let him be. He's just walking somewhere." James arrived a few minutes later carrying a box of pastries wrapped in brown paper and a bottle of apple juice under one arm. He didn't say much, just nodded in greeting and let his shoulders drop as he sat down on the edge of the blanket shoes, off socks, half wet from the damp earth. There was something about how his elbows rested on his knees that said, "I'm not here to perform." They ate slowly. No rush, no plan. Amber handed Agnes a small paper plate with pieces of cheddar and grapes, and the little girl examined each item carefully before popping a grape into her mouth. "Juicy," she said, making them both chuckle. James looked over at Amber. "You always carry grapes and paper plates." She shrugged. "Old habit. My mom used to say, if you can make a child feel full, they'll trust you more." "Not forever, but for a little while." He nodded slowly, chewing on that idea. "That's probably true for adults, too." The breeze picked up a little, lifting the corner of the picnic blanket. Amber pressed it down absently, eyes scanning the open field. A few families were walking their dogs in the distance. Someone was flying a red kite, and its tail fluttered above them like a question mark suspended in the sky. James leaned back, hands behind him in the grass. "Agnes asked me this morning if she could call you something else." Amber turned to him, brow raised. "Like what she didn't say?" "Just asked, is it okay if I call her my something?" I think she was working it out. Amber looked at Agnes now sitting cross-legged and arranging leaves into a little row. "She can call me whatever makes her feel safe." James was quiet for a moment. "Then that includes Mom." Amber didn't flinch. She didn't smile either. She just took a breath, held it, and then released it softly. "Only if she's the one who chooses it. And only if she knows it's hers to use, not something we ask her to say." James nodded. "That's fair." Agnes came over and handed Amber a folded piece of construction paper. Crayon lines filled the inside, messy and bright. A figure with long braids holding hands with a smaller figure. Underneath it, in scribbled letters, it said, "You are my home." Amber blinked a few times. She didn't open her mouth, just leaned forward and kissed the top of Agnes's head. "I made it," Agnes said proudly. "I know," Amber whispered. "It's perfect." James watched them both, something heavy and warm settling in his chest. "I don't know what this is supposed to be," he said quietly. Amber looked up at him, steady. "It doesn't have to be anything. It just has to be honest." They sat like that for a while. No declarations, no promises. Just a man, a woman, and a little girl who had rewritten each other's lives without realizing it. Later, as the sun slid behind the tree line, Agnes curled up on Amber's lap, thumb in her mouth, half asleep. James gathered the dishes and tied the garbage bag, moving slowly, deliberately, as if rushing would shatter the moment. Amber looked out across the field, voice low. "I used to think family was about blood, about birth and last names and who sat where on Thanksgiving. But maybe it's simpler than that." James followed her gaze. "Maybe it's about who shows up." She nodded. "Who stays, even when there's no reason to." He sat back down, brushing a leaf from her shoulder. "You know," he said softly, "we don't need to name this, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Amber didn't answer right away. She just pulled the blanket tighter around Agnes and looked at him, not with surprise, but with a quiet acceptance that had taken a long, hard road to earn. "I know," she said. "That's why it matters." The sky turned a deeper blue. Crickets started to hum. And as they sat there, the three of them wrapped in silence and soft light, it didn't feel like a conclusion. It felt like a beginning. No ceremony, no spotlight, just a child with a drawing, a man with open hands, and a woman who finally chose to stay. If you've stayed with us through this entire journey, thank you. You've just witnessed one of those rare, soul-stirring stories where a simple act of courage from a grocery clerk changed not just a moment, but an entire family's future. It's not just about a single dad or a little girl in pink sneakers. It's about finding hope in the places we least expect, about quiet strength, second chances, and choosing to stay when no one's watching. If this touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. Share how this heartwarming story made you feel, because sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that stay with us the longest. And this, maybe more than anything, was never just a grocery clerk saved a baby in the parking lot. It was about what came after and what it awakened in all of us. Stay close. The story isn't over yet.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.